I just wanted to show you an example of what your research log check-in number 2 might entail. This is my sample research log for A2. I've done it in PowerPoint mostly just because I like the fun templates, but also because I like to be able to manipulate text boxes and add shapes to, point to things or whatever else. And this just has a lot of formatting options. Keep in mind that all the things I'm going to show you today, you can do in a normal document, you could do in a notebook, so you don't have to do any of this goofiness if you don't want to. All right, so my question or my issue is the environmental impact of golf. There we go. So a few features of my research log that you don't have to include are I have put in my inquiry questions. So I did this when we're in our first stage of research, and I started with one, and then I added 2 more to sort of expand my research. And you can keep adding inquiry questions as you go, although obviously you'll have a lot of inquiry questions that you won't formally write down. They'll just be things you know you need to look into. But then as we've started to narrow down our focus and we're picking our arguments, or you're picking your argument, but I'm kind of doing it too with this sample, I've decided on a thesis statement, and I'm going to put it here too just to guide my research. So in order to establish regulations that will minimize the environmental impact of golf courses and golf tourism, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency should sponsor more research on golf and the environment, particularly on solutions that will minimize environmental harm. This is kind of a long, clunky thesis. I will probably cut it down or revise it as I get clearer on exactly what points I'm making, but for now, it does guide my argument. I know that I'm going to probably be addressing the EPA, and I know that my focus is going to be on the need for more research, which will then lead to the need for regulations or restrictions on the industry. All right, so that part is not necessarily something you'll have in your research log. It's just handy for me. But this is the part that is going to more closely reflect what you'll have in your research log. So these 2 beginning sources are examples of kind of what you did for the first research log check-in. These are just the sources I found when I was first exploring this topic. So this is my podcast that I listened to. This is a popular article that I found that was really interesting, but it wasn't necessarily a source that I would actually use for A2. And so I've made some notes on those. This is what this focuses on, but I know that I'm not going to use these for A2, and so in red I've noted won't use for A2. Keep in mind that that was something I added later as I was gathering sources and I know more about what I'm saying. I know that this one is from 2007. It's kind of old. It's also an opinion piece of sorts, so it's probably a little too biased. But this is good to have just to know where I started, and this one does reference a UN study that I might want to go back and find later. So now I'm into my more specific research. I'm finding things that are probably going to be more helpful for A2. One of the things I found is this source here, which was a little short article about a study or about a report that was done by the United States Golf Association. And this was a handy little source to kind of tell me about this report. And so I've taken some notes, this is up to date. The report was done in 2020. But I need to find the actual report. So I made this note for myself. So that kind of helps me with my future research. I said might use that report for A2. This also did let me in on a narrowed part of my issue. So my general issue is the environmental impact of golf. This article or this report talks about the fact that golf courses are getting longer, the distances are getting further, and that's bad for the environment and the industry. So now I know this is something I could potentially focus on for my A2 argument. So what I did then, using my little note to find, is I went and found it. So this is the actual report, and this is the part that I'm going to actually use. And so this is one of the ones that I chose to put more detailed notes in, like I'm instructing you to do for your second check-in. So this is one of the examples. And this is an example of how your research log might look similar to how it did before, but just with more sources, and then some of those sources will have expanded notes. So for this one, it's a study done by 2 industry groups that concludes that increasing the distance of golf courses or making them longer is a problem. So that's great because it helps establish the problem that I'm talking about. I might use this for A2, so I've highlighted this in yellow. So I'm using sort of a red light, green light, yellow light system to remind my future self which sources I know I want to use, which sources I might want to use, so I can find them again later. And I've made a note that I might want to do some future research on this. The key point that this is going to support is a support that research and restrictions are both economically beneficial and environmentally beneficial. So that this isn't going to destroy, the economic benefits of golf. It's actually going to help the golf industry. This source's credibility. So this is an industry affiliated source. This was done by 2 golf industry places. So the United States Golf Association and then RNA, which I couldn't figure out what that stood for, but it's another kind of group that supports golf courses and does all sorts of research about golf. So in some ways, this isn't as credible because it looks kind of biased. Right? This is coming directly from the industry. So I made a note that I'm going to need to back it up with some kind of unbiased source, maybe a peer-reviewed source. But the good news about this being an industry source is that it shows that this idea isn't anti-golf, that my call for restrictions isn't actually going to hurt the golfing industry. This isn't me saying down with the golfing industry. So if I have any stakeholders in my group who like golf or want to continue to see the economic benefits of golf, this will help reassure them that this is an even-keeled argument that isn't attacking anyone. They also used data that was gathered from a bunch of different golf courses all over the world. So 8 different tours, which include a number of golf courses from countries like Japan, Germany, the US. And so I might reference that in my paper, that they gathered a wide range of data from different countries. And that helps show that this was a really, well-researched study. The other thing you'll see is I've highlighted this in purple, and I'll explain that in just a second. Whoop! It's not what I meant to do. As usual, I'm not that technologically competent. All right, so this is my next source. It's just on the next page because I ran out of space, but also this is a source I know that I want to use for A2. So I gave it a little bit more time and effort than I would with the other ones that I'm not totally sure about. This source is about the actual lack of research on the issue of golf tourism. So I know that this will be helpful because what I'm arguing for is that more research is needed, and this helps back that up. It's a recent peer-reviewed scholarly journal. So that's what I can reference when I talk about credibility. In my paper, I can say, according to an article in the peer-reviewed journal Sustainability, blah, 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 blah. And that helps boost my ethos. So that's why I'm asking you to make notes on this. The key point that this is going to support is basically the same one I just referenced, but now I know a little bit more about what that's going to look like, having done the research. So this is how I'm phrasing my key point right now. Before deciding on what regulations or restrictions to implement, more research is needed to ensure future measures are as effective as possible. And I know that this is going to support that key point, and that source that I just talked about is also going to support that key point. And so that's why I added the purple. I picked purple just because it stood out. It wasn't one of the colors I was already using to indicate which sources I wanted to use and not. And I know now that I'm going to associate purple with this key point. And so I know those sources can work together. So I've made a note also, this fits with the USGA source in showing both economic and environmental benefits. This is what I'm talking about when I ask you, what are the connections between sources? So it can be extra notes, it can be arrows pointing to 2 sources, it can be a color coding, whatever will help you make those connections to prepare to use multiple sources to support each of your key points. Now, this is a feature that I want you to be doing in your head at least, but it doesn't need to be in your research log. But I'm just adding some extra things that I know I want to research. So I know I need to find some statistics on the popularity or the growth of golf tourism or golf in the US in recent years. The reason I know I need that is because I need to establish exigency. Why does this need to happen now? So if I can show that golf is a growing industry and then also show that there are problems with the environmental impact of golf, then together that shows that this is something we need to handle. So these are just my questions for how I might continue my research, and these will help me find more specific results that I know I need to put in my paper. And then this is something I do. So when I ask you in the research log check-in 2 what pieces of evidence you might use, you can just have like really quick blurbs about like, I might use this to prove this, or I might use this to show like stats on this. But one thing that I like to do when I'm writing a paper is I like to actually pull quotes and page numbers and then come back to this when I write my paper. Keep in mind that these are big long chunks, and most of this I would either paraphrase or I would cut into a shorter quote. But if I'm writing my A2 draft, it's a lot easier to come to this page and copy and paste a piece of this quote or reread this quote and then paraphrase it than it is to go back to my entire 18-page long article and read through it and try to find what I was needing. So this is one of the things that speeds up my writing process a ton. But you obviously don't have to do this if it feels like an extra step for you. And you might think of other ways you can do something like this, like using some sort of bookmarking, feature, or highlighting specific parts that you might use later, just to make it easy for your future self to find the research that you know you're going to use. So I hope that this has been a helpful guide to some of the ways that you might expand your research log. Keep in mind that this kind of stuff with these expanded notes is the only thing that I'm looking for. So I'm looking for you to have 5 sources at least, with at least 3 of them with some notes that are at least as detailed as this. But those notes can look in whatever way is helpful to you. So as long as I can see that you're making connections, that you're starting to think about your TRE outline and your key points, that is all you need to do. So you don't need to make your research log more complicated than is useful to you. I hope that helps. Happy researching.